So the more you meditate, the longer you meditate, the more hardcore you meditate, the greater the chances are of some kind of side effect. I think that there's a lot about meditation that people don't understand. Is mindfulness safe? Is meditation safe? Well, the answer is, so today we're going to talk about the dark side of meditation. I love this topic. So like when I started getting into meditation about 21 years ago, if y'all can believe that, I was super skeptical of it. So I was like a really big skeptic, and I'm still in a sense a skeptic. But I really, so I went to India and I stayed in an ashram and I was like, what is this BS? And then people were talking about like energies and stuff, and people were talking about manifesting and all this kind of crap. And I was like, what is this stupid BS, dude? What are these people talking about? None of this is scientific. So I practiced meditation for about 3 months and all kinds of different meditations and pranayams. And I really started to like it a lot. I was like, okay, this is actually, there's something here. But I was still somewhat skeptical. So the first thing that I actually did was join a research lab in India while I was still there. So it's cool because the first ashram that I went to had a research division. So I did EEG, studies on EEG on meditators. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, like what does the science say? And for the first kind of year or two, I really focused on practices that had biological plausibility or research support, as well as spiritual stuff. So I gravitated away from the spiritual practices and really focused on, okay, what can science really show is the benefit of meditation? And so that kind of ultimately started a journey where I ended up being a research assistant at this place called the OSHA Research Center at Harvard, which is super cool. I was doing somatosensory research on the somatosensory cortex on Tai Chi. So it was very cool. So like learning really about the science of it. And then, you know, when I was practicing meditation, I encountered, and we'll talk about this more towards the end, you know, a lot of weird stuff, including personal experiences, including people that I met with. You know, I had a teacher who was teaching me about Kundalini sadhana. So Kundalini is like this energy that is seated at the base of your spine and rises up through your chakras. And they were telling me that, you know, when you do this kind of meditation practice, you can't be near people because you'll become hypersexual. So you and I, that's so fucking shady. You and I need to go out into the woods, into a cabin, and then I'm going to do things to you that make you hypersexual. And then I'll help you control it and clean out your chakras and stuff like that. And it's going to be dangerous for you to be anywhere else. And I was like, okay. And it turned out totally fine. It was great, all that good stuff. But the problem is that when we look at that kind of stuff, right, it's like rife for abuse. And one of the big dark sides of meditation, I know it's sus, is that there is a lot of room for abuse. So I think that there's a lot about meditation that people don't understand. I think there are dangers to meditation, very real dangers that are scientific. I've worked with people who have had negative psychological experiences from meditation. You know, I've seen patients in the emergency room who are there because they believe they're having a chakra awakening and they're like acutely psychotic. And so, you know, it's super cool to see this stuff clinically. I mean, it sucks for the person, but I'm grateful for the experience in terms of my growth and learning. So there are dangers to it. So let's kind of start with like kind of a bit of history, okay? So if we want to understand whether meditation is safe or not, we have to understand, first of all, what has happened to meditation over the last 100 years, okay? So between, let's say, 5,000 years ago to about 100 years ago, meditation was basically considered a spiritual tradition that was taught within spiritual settings by spiritual masters. So it's like for the spiritual people, by the spiritual people, spiritual practice. About 100 years ago, some Westerners started to learn meditation. So a big part of this was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi with the explosion of TM, Transcendental Meditation, in the 60s. So Maharishi Mahesh Yogi like shows up, and this is like the good old days of like psychedelics and spiritual gurus and Osho and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And so they start teaching meditation. And what happens is a group of people start to really benefit from it. And these people also have a background in science. So they see some beautiful progress with it, and they're like, we should study this. And good job, y'all. So they started doing a lot of studies on meditation, the benefits of meditation. A lot of this stuff was funded kind of by the transcendental meditation people. And then over time, we started to explore more and more meditation. And then a couple of like really important milestones. I think a big part of this was also Jon Kabat-Zinn. So maybe about 20 years ago, I'm not sure, and apologies to Jon Kabat-Zinn if I misrepresent this, but so he sort of runs the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts. And I think there was a big movement to try to figure out, okay, if we're trying to study meditation, how do we do this, right? Because if you look at meditation, there's tantric meditation, there's chakra meditation, there's pranayam, there's qigong, there's transcendental meditation, there's mantra meditation, there's visualizations, there's guided meditations, there's yoga nidra, there's deep relaxation techniques. These are all kinds of different stuff. And how do we study this, right? Because these are all different things, like doing like a Wim Hof style Nepalese, I'm going to be in sub-zero temperatures naked and not getting frostbite meditation is very different from do a guided meditation about let's take a walk through your safe space in the forest. These are different things, neurologically, psychologically, consciously, physiologically. These are different things, right? So there's some techniques of meditation, for example, that can increase the peripheral body temperature by up to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? About 5 degrees Celsius, 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. That's very different from a guided visualization of walking through the woods. So Jon Kabat-Zinn did something super cool. So he tried to define mindfulness. So what he tried to do, I think, I met the guy many years ago when I was doing research at Harvard because we collaborated some with my PIs. But, here's what I see as the brilliance of what he did. He tried to take all of these different spiritual traditions and boil them down to the most basic component, which is what he calls mindfulness. Now, the cool thing about doing that is this standardizes what we're studying. So now we're studying mindfulness, which is these 4 things, like attention in the present, non-judgmental awareness, like a couple of these different things that constitute mindfulness. But this is not meditation. This in Sanskrit is called Sakshi Bhav, which is the very first step of meditation. So a couple of important things happened there. The first is that we're now able to standardize it. We're now able to study it because we're talking about the same thing. So that's good, but we lose a lot of the spiritual power and a lot of the esoteric practices because there's nothing about mantras in mindfulness meditation, right? Mindfulness is not about mantras. There's nothing about energy or shakti or accumulating or manifesting or anything like that. It's just the basics of understanding your mind. And so now what started to happen is we've had a division within this idea of meditation. We have the secularized, sterilized, protocolized, denuded of gurus tradition of mindfulness. This is predominantly what we find in apps. Then on the flip side, we have these more esoteric meditative traditions that do more hardcore meditation. And these things are not all the same. They're apples and oranges. And as we'll discover, there are many different types of meditation which we're now beginning to categorize. So now we get to the issue of safety. Because is mindfulness safe? Is meditation safe? Well, the answer is it depends. What kind of meditation are you doing? What kind of mindfulness are you doing? Because the kind of practice that you do will correlate with how safe or unsafe it is. Okay? So let's take a look at some really interesting articles that are talking about that. So this, I think, is what we're going to start with. So unwanted effects. Is there a negative side of meditation, a multi-center study? So the first thing that I want to point out to y'all is that this is starting to happen where people are starting to break apart the different kinds of meditation. So one is something called focused attention. One is open monitoring. One is imagination. One is body awareness. One is compassion. And one is some kind of informal practice, okay? So we talk about this a lot in Dr. K's Guide to Meditation. We talk about dharana, right? Which is very different from just an open monitoring, which is like a mindfulness-based practice. So just to let you all know, this is about, sometimes when I meditate, I'm just sitting there with my eyes closed and I'm just chilling, right? Just monitoring, just observing whatever comes. This is mindfulness. And there are other times where we're doing practices like charging the laser beam. So I'm putting all of my attention into this point right kind of over here, slightly above the eyebrows and the source of the Brahmanadi. Or I'm doing a focused attention, a practice on something like the Muladhara Chakra. And then I can add something like Mula Bandha, which is a contraction of my perineum, which is also part of a meditative practice. So the perineum is the area between your scrotum and your anus. If you're a man, it's somewhere, around the vagina, and it's kind of inside the vagina, kind of near the G-spot for women. So there's a Kegel exercises when you contract that. That's a different kind of practice. And in the meditative tradition, the benefits of meditation and the risks of meditation correlate with the intensity of the practice. So the hypersexuality-inducing practice that I did was a Muladhara chakra practice. So this is the root chakra. This is where our sexual energy resides. And so as you activate this through meditation, all kinds of things will start to happen. And so even the safety of the practice depends. So doing contraction of the Muladhara chakra is, generally speaking, pretty safe. Gynecologists will teach this in their office, right, as Kegel exercises. But when we combine that with certain breathing practices, when we combine it with consciousness practices, where we're focusing our attention plus contraction plus pranayam, when we're lowering our respiratory rate or we're hyperventilating, we're doing all kinds of different things that will vastly alter the benefits of the practice, the awakening of the chakra, as well as the safety concerns. So the first thing that we have to understand about meditation is that it's not all the same, okay? So here are a couple of, this is just one categorization. There are other ways to kind of categorize it. And then they'll also look at things like years of practice, right? So there are other issues like how veteran of a meditator are you? Is hiking dangerous or is it safe? Well, it depends on where you go, how competent you are, what your experience is, how prepared you are. That determines whether an activity is safe or not. So now what we can do is they looked at unwanted effects. So this is a sample size pretty small. It's 87 people. So 25%, 1/4 of people reported some kind of thing that they didn't enjoy. The majority of people who had an unwanted effect are, not majority, the plurality of people are individual practice. And this is what's really interesting, is that focused attention actually has the highest likelihood. So 17% of people who had an unpleasant experience were doing focused attention. And 8% of people were doing body scan. So body scan seems to be the safest. Focused attention is the most dangerous, and we'll talk about why that is once we get to the meditative theory, because yogis will tell you the same thing. Hey y'all, if you're interested in applying some of the principles that we share to actually create change in your life, check out Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health. And so we start by understanding what literally is meditation. How does experience shape us as human beings? How do we strengthen the mind itself as an organ? And so by understanding our mind, we understand a very, very simple tool, a crucial tool that we have to learn how to use if we want to build the life that we want to. So check out the link in the bio and start your journey today. The other thing that we tend to see is that a higher duration of practice correlates with more adverse effects. And I don't know if y'all have heard me talk about this, but usually what I'll say is that we should meditate for about 20 minutes. Right? So I've said this. So if y'all watch Dr. K's Guide to Meditation, about 18 minutes is how long it takes to trigger inhibition of cortisol production from the hypothalamus. So meditating under 20 minutes is basically quite safe. And the longer that you meditate, greater than 40 minutes, we see an increase in the risk of side effects. Let's look at the kinds of side effects people get. So people will get anxiety, including panic attacks. So I think some of this is like physiologic in nature. Depersonalization or derealization experiences are also quite common, right? So 10% of people have some sense of disconnection or disconnection from the self. But half of the people don't report any kind of details about what is unpleasant. The good news is that continuous symptoms are quite rare, right? So when we advise people about meditation, we say, if something weird is happening, stop, first of all, and then go see a doctor. Those are the two things that you should do if you have an adverse experience in meditation. And people may wonder, okay, what is a doctor going to do if they don't understand the meditation? You'd be surprised at how decent they are, right? So we're trained in a lot of like basically simple clinical reasoning, which is like, if you're doing something and it's hurting you, stop doing it. And let's evaluate you for other things that could be going wrong, right? Let's just do a thorough diagnostic workup for psychosis, for panic attacks. Let's just see what's kind of going on here. So we have systems, even if a doctor may not be sufficiently trained in meditation, we are generally trained in the things that are dangerous, right? So we know how to detect schizophrenia. We know how to detect mania. And we're good at picking up that stuff, so we can just make sure that something else isn't going on and that you can be safe. Good news is that the majority of people don't have continuous problems from meditation. It looks like discontinued meditation, yes. That's kind of scary, right? Very few people discontinued. And very few people sought care from a medical professional, which I think makes a lot of sense, which is why we try to encourage you to do that, right? So don't be like these people. So once again, we're starting to see some basic issues about, or basic understanding of side effects from meditation. And then we're going to go on even a little bit more. So now the paper, what it really does is looks into a lot of different specifics of what kind of adverse effect people have, right? And we see some of this stuff in our community. So 66% of people experience some degree of lack of interest in their surroundings. This is arguably a benefit of meditation, right? That we become a little bit more detached. Lack of interest in other people's conversations. IDGAF. I'm just not interested in other people. We start to feel bored by other people, right? This is a percentage of people who have some kind of minimum scoring of yes. And the good news is that this is the percentage of people who experience maximal symptoms of this. And this is very low, right? So it's not like people have a 10 out of 10 great emotional pain, but 52% of people experience some degree of emotional pain. 45% of people experience some degree of self-criticism. 59% of people experience some degree of more fear, anxiety, or depression. 68% of people experience a lack of orientation, less motivation in life, right? And so now the question becomes, is this an unwanted side effect, or is this part of the benefit of meditation? So these are kind of reported negatively, but I think this is important for y'all to understand, is that there could be changes if y'all meditate in all of these different dimensions. And this is why it's important when you learn meditation to learn from someone who is like a competent practitioner or a medical professional, because they can help you navigate through these things, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay? So now what we're going to do is take a look at a couple of the conclusions of this study. So first thing is, most reported unwanted effects are mild and do not lead to discontinued meditation or the need for medical assistance. So that's pretty good, right? So even if something happens, I think y'all should stop, but they don't lead to long-term consequences. In fact, can be related to changes in detached perspective of the self, different stages of insight, or the use of meditation in participants with previous pathological disorders that have not been correctly diagnosed, okay? So what this kind of is talking about is that some of these can be psychologically challenging. They can lead to a detached perspective of self. They can lead to changes in the way that you see the world, okay? So study also confirmed the second hypothesis, that a higher frequency of practice may generate more unwanted effects, especially in terms of duration of the session. So the more you meditate, the longer you meditate, the more hardcore you meditate, the greater the chances are of some kind of side effect. This is why we, generally speaking, advocate for 20 minutes a day, 3 to 5 times a week, or even every day is okay. This is also really important. Confirmed our initial hypothesis that some types of meditation practices may interact to influence the prevalence of unwanted effects. Focused attention is associated with unwanted effects, i.e. the most dangerous, whereas body awareness practices are associated with fewer unwanted effects. So let's talk about this for a second. Why is this? So if we look at the clinical use of meditation, when we use meditation in a clinical setting, not all meditations are the same. So if you look at something like dialectical behavioral therapy is a therapy that has a lot of grounding techniques. So these are people, this is usually used for people who have things like borderline personality disorder. So intense amounts of emotional dysregulation when things are bad. People with BPD can also have a tendency to experience derealization or depersonalization. They feel untethered from their sense of self. They can have a lot of negative thoughts. So we want to use meditations that ground them in their experience of self. So when someone is having a borderline personality disorder crisis, they're catastrophizing. They think they're a terrible person. They're also activating some hemispheric lateralization, which means that their brain is actually activating a dissociative protective mechanism. Okay, this is all in Dr. K's Guide to Trauma if y'all are interested. So what happens when we experience too much is our brain, just like tech support, is like, you know what? This is busted. Why don't we try turning it off and turning it on again? So if you have some problem in your computer, what do? You turn it off and you turn it on again. You'll see if that fixes the problem. Works in the brain too. The brain is a computer. So the brain is like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to dissociate for a little bit. I'm going to let this physiology calm down, and then I'll plug back in tomorrow. This is what a dissociative episode is. It gets triggered by trauma. We even know that the neuroscience of this is we have our right hemisphere, which experiences a lot of emotion. we have our left hemisphere, which experiences a lot of analysis. And literally what happens is the traffic between the two hemispheres starts to get reduced. Traffic across the corpus callosum gets reduced. Bessel van der Kolk did some amazing studies on this. And when that traffic gets reduced, we basically block off our emotions. We don't experience them anymore. When we dissociate and we become depersonalized, our analytical mind is working, but our emotions aren't active at all. So when people talk about trauma, right, they can talk about it in a very, very numb way because they're just thinking about it very dispassionately because the emotions are too much to handle. The brain is trying to protect you from it. So the body will release natural endorphins to protect you from the sensation of pain, right? That's why pain gets better over time. When I have an acute injury, it hurts a lot. And then over time, it starts to hurt less. That's because endorphins are kicking in. Our psychology, our neurology has the same kind of protective mechanisms. So body awareness practices makes perfect sense that they do not lead to negative experiences because these are the practices that we use to ground people in their body. Now, focused attention is a different category. And open awareness is also a different category. So one of the things that we have to be careful about for open awareness meditations is this is when I'm just sitting there and I'm going to observe non-judgmentally whatever comes up in my mind. Now, this works great if there isn't a lot of toxic stuff lying dormant in your mind. So remember that our mind has psychological defense mechanisms. What is that? So our mind, in order to stay safe, blocks off certain negative experiences. So y'all will know this if you've ever talked to someone who's in denial, right? You try to tell him, hey, your drinking is a problem, bro. And he's like, no, it isn't. It's fine. I'm not as bad as this person. It'll be a problem when I'm as bad as this person. That's when it's a problem. It's not a problem right now. It's not my problem. You can have a narcissistic defense, which is like, I'm great and you're wrong, you're bad. It's a very black and white way of thinking. You're doing everything bad. I'm doing everything right. Right? Because why? Why does the narcissistic defense exist? It exists because if you screwed up and you acknowledge how bad you screwed up, the guilt from that could be so overwhelming that it would cripple you. Right? So this is why we have defense mechanisms. And defense mechanisms are there for a reason, to protect ourselves. So when we do some open awareness meditations, we have to be very careful if you have a history of trauma or something like that. Because as we non-judgmentally observe things, the problem is that the non-judgmentalness is a skill. If you just stop for a second and close your eyes and you observe whatever comes up, the basic problem of being human is that we are not non-judgmental. As a thought comes up, I'm a loser, we can't view that thought non-judgmentally. As a thought comes up, oh, my friends from high school are doing so much better than I am, we can't view that non-judgmentally. We may be able to view some negative aspects of ourselves non-judgmentally, but there's basically a difficulty curve, right? It's like there's a level 1 mob, there's a level 99 mob. And these things have very different hit point pools, very different damage, very different armor ratings, very different move sets. And so the thoughts in our mind have different levels of difficulty, different strengths for us to be detached from. So open awareness meditation, I do not recommend if you're keeping a lot of stuff bottled up. So if you engage in a lot of avoidance strategies, video games, pornography, drugs, whatever, oh, I'm feeling bad, let me go distract myself from my mind. What is that? That's another defense mechanism. So open awareness is the process of opening that up, letting whatever comes up. It can be useful. It can be good. Right? Because we want to level that up eventually, but it can be very dangerous. So I think open awareness meditation, for example, I'll do that with patients with a history of trauma if I'm there with them, because then whatever comes up, then we work through that, right? So you have to be careful about open awareness. Now we get to focused attention. Now, why is focused attention the most dangerous? Because focused attention is the stuff that is activating all the chakras. Okay, so now we have to understand this very clearly. See, all the weird esoteric techniques are not body scans. They're not open awareness. They're focusing your energy into a particular chakra. So the ones that are more powerful, the ones that are more dangerous, are the ones that involve focused attention because it is a meditative goal that you are trying to achieve. So there are easier versions of this and harder versions of this, or more powerful and less powerful. Let's put it that way. So, right? So when I'm defining power as like, there's more powerful explosions and less powerful explosions. That's neither good nor bad. It's just if we're talking about fireworks, like great, we want a less powerful explosion that does the job. If we're talking about nuclear fission, that's a whole different ballgame. So with the more powerful meditation comes more danger, just like the difference between a firecracker and a nuclear reaction. And all of the techniques that are more esoteric in nature usually involve focused awareness. So that makes them both more potent and more dangerous, okay? So focused awareness was found to be positively associated with greater self-criticism and feeling that the time spent not meditating was wasted. We're going to talk about that in a second. So this paper, let's just kind of recap, right? So this paper is looking at the different kinds of meditation and recognize the different kinds of side effects that we can have. And we have a couple of like quick TLDRs about safe meditation practice. First of all, if something bad happens, stop. If something bad happens, go seek guidance from a medical professional or a spiritual teacher who's competent. Next thing is frequency and duration of practice increase the risk, and focused attention is more dangerous and also more potent. Body scanning yourself for 20 minutes a day seems incredibly safe, according to this paper, right? And also as a clinician, I've seen very, very, very few adverse reactions to body scanning. None comes to mind. I'm not saying that they can't happen, but I've never really seen one. The only thing I can think about and we'll talk about this in a second too, is that sometimes if people are already not in a healthy state of mind, then body scanning can be problematic. So if I'm working with a patient, for example, with the Cotard delusion, so this is a manifestation oftentimes of schizophrenia. The Cotard delusion is the belief that a part of your body is dead or rotting. So people just believe, they're like, my kidney is dead. And you'll be like, what does that mean? And they'll say, like, my kidney is dead. Like, it's rotting inside me. It's no longer alive. A part of my body has died and is rotting, and it needs to be removed. And we check their GFR, glomerular filtration rate, seems completely normal. Their creatinine clearance is normal. Kidney looks intact. We can ultrasound that baby. Looks like it's working fine. So sometimes what happens in schizophrenia is we have all of these benign symptoms from our body, signals from our body, which that get interpreted through the schizophrenic mind as negative, right? And let's just talk about that for a second because it's cool. So the problem with schizophrenia is that there are associations that get made that normally shouldn't get made. So if I look up at the sky and I see a cloud and I say, that looks like a dog. It's not a dog, it's a cloud. It's a random assortment of water molecules that have been vaporized and are in the atmosphere. There's no dog there. But our brain has a circuit that generates a pattern out of neutral stimuli. In schizophrenia, this circuit becomes hyperactive. So when I'm walking down the street and I see someone walking by me and they nod, I'm like, that means something. We start seeing patterns where they don't exist. Then I walk past the second person, this person smiles. And I walk past a third person, and this person is on their cell phone. And I think to myself, hold on a second, this is 1, 2, 3. And then I look at the door, the address of the place next to me, and it says 111 123. There are 3 ones, and it's a 1, 2, 3. And then I see a car that has 0, 2, 3. Because there are too many ones over there, and there's 0, 2, 3. There's an absence of ones. So this is somehow connected. There's 1, 2, 3. I'm seeing 1, 2, 3 everywhere. And this is what happens in schizophrenia. So now what we think about is that sometimes with body signals, this can happen. So when I worked with people who have things like the Cotard delusion, I'll ask them, tell me what the sensory stimuli are. And usually what happens is they have an olfactory stimulus. Something is smelly. Something smells like it's rotting. And then everywhere I go, I smell the rotting smell. Therefore, what do you conclude? It must be some part of me. And by the way, I feel a twinge over here. Maybe you've got a tiny little kidney stone forming, right? Or you sleep on one side or something like that. And then they combine these things. So body scans, we have to be careful if someone has some pre-existing things. So if they have an internal hypersensitivity, which we can see in things like panic attacks, we can see in things like irritable bowel syndrome, then we have to be careful about body scanning. But generally speaking, focused attention is more esoteric, more powerful, therefore more dangerous. Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.